test. Mic test. One, two, three.
Sound check. Sound check one. Check two. Sound check. Huh? Yeah. Sound check one two. Set.
Good morning. So we are starting a bit earlier, and I think that's fine since we can also start lunch earlier, or we can have more time for the discussion, for more questions and discussions. So welcome to the parallel sessions of the 2017 Pacific Public Conference. So this is session 1A, the Achieving a Blue-Green Economy. Chairing this session is Mr. Gordon Burns. He's the Counselor for Regional Development Cooperation at the Australian High Commission in Suva. Gordon is esteemed at DFAT Regional Work in Climate Change and Resilience, as well as Education, Health and Gender. He has worked with the Australian Aid Program for the past 13 years, primarily on Pacific issues, and prior to that, he was a management consultant with the firm Booz Allen Hamilton. So to open this session and to chair the session, Mr. Burns.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and good morning, everybody. And I might relatively recently returned from the USP Council meeting in Majuro, and I see the Pro-Chancellor with us for this session. Good morning. I thought I might adapt something I learnt there from Cook Islands Prime Minister Henry Puna, which was a diplomatic nicety to say all protocols observed to begin with. So, good morning, everybody. This is also the first time I've been streamed live. So, everybody, if you could please be gentle. This is a new experience, so hello to everybody out there in the land of the internet. I think that's also maybe a small personal example of how fast our economies and societies are changing with technology, that we're in a wonderful conference like this, and we're also connected immediately to the rest of the world. It's a real honour for me to be the chair of this parallel session 1A on the achieving a blue-green economy. Not to suggest that any parallel sessions are more equal than any other parallel sessions, but I do feel like this is a very important session, and recognising that it's at the centre of one of the three and I think very well selected focuses of this conference. So there's a whole bunch of ideas swirling around, and they're swirling particularly fast this year in 2017 with both Pacific leadership of the major SDG 14 conference we've just seen, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Dr. Hills the update and readout from that conference, and also with the first time a small island developing state has held the presidency of the Conference of the Parties to the for UNFCCC, and so the prospect of a Pacific Conference of the Parties this year, in a year that's turned out to be such a crucial year in climate negotiations and progress on that front. So I'm very excited to hear from the speakers about all of these ideas that are swirling around. And one thing that is, I think, an additional source of excitement for me around the notion of achieving a blue-green economy is that in a space where we're often confronted by research which could lead you to feel a little disheartened or concerned, this is a space and a framework for thinking where we're looking at something optimistically about what's the opportunity to consider development in a Pacific context that's relevant to identity and society. What does it mean to be a steward of a large ocean state and oceanic people, and how to balance responsibility with utilisation of natural resources in the context of things that we hear. An example of, I think, a point from the research that's really captured people's attention this year, certainly mine, is this figure, I'm sure you've all heard it now, that potentially within our lifetime or the lifetime of our children, there might be more plastic by weight in the ocean than there is fish. And that's a really striking figure. So in the context of that sort of concerning, concerning climate and environmental research, it's exciting to have an agenda here that's really positive and forward-looking and looking at what's possible here in the Pacific. So with that as an introduction, I'd now like to call on our first presenter, Tess Newton-Kane, to present her paper on what has been the impact of blue-green growth in the Pacific.
Thank you, Gordon, and thank you to the organisers for giving us an opportunity to present the findings of, or the interim findings of an ongoing research project. You can see the names of the members of the research team there, and I drew the short straw in more than one way of being up here talking. They're all sitting there keenly ready to answer your very difficult questions later. I would just draw your attention to this document, which you can pick up from the back table, I believe. It's hot off the press. It's a Pacific Leadership Programme briefing note, which also provides some information about this research project. So there is the research team. In the USP corner, we have Sandra Tart and Wesley Morgan. And in the ANU corner, you have me and Matthew Dornan. And as you can see, Sandra and I look much more excited about this than our very serious young male colleagues. These are the research questions that we developed at the start of this process. It's been a fairly lengthy process through various stages, and as it won't come as a surprise to you to learn that some of these questions have changed, have taken on different iterations. Some have moved around a bit in terms of the priority that they've given. But these are the questions that we started off with in terms of how we would look at the role of concepts such as green growth or the blue-green economy in policy making in the Pacific Island region. So our interim findings, and they are interim findings, we've completed the field work, which included spending time in both Vanuatu and here in Fiji, and we're now in the process of doing some analysis and preparing some papers around this. But these are our interim findings. The ones that are italicized and underlined are the ones that I'm going to talk about in a little more detail during this presentation. The other two are quite important, and I will come back to them later on because they are increasingly becoming the overarching narratives that we're dealing with. One is the lack of definition, which is possibly better framed in terms of multiple definitions of what green growth means, what it means politically, what it means in terms of policy making, what it means in terms of policy implementation, and also this issue of trade-offs. So where do these trade-offs arise in terms of explicit acknowledgement in policy documentation, and possibly more significantly, where are they going to arise, or where is the potential for them to arise in terms of how policy is implemented? And in particular, that's things around the trade-off between increasing economic growth, particularly in terms of GDP growth, as opposed to, or as contrasted with, or traded off against environmental management or social inclusion. So what we've already discovered, and what we're still working through our thinking about, is the multiple pathways and discourses that arise within a more global term such as green growth or a blue-green economy. The genealogy of this term, or this group of terms, at a global level is certainly predates its adoption in the Pacific Island region. So it stemmed from work done through the OECD, the World Bank, and other more global or international bodies. In the Pacific context, it seems to have taken on its most significant impetus post-2012, and particularly post the Rio 20 Plus convention, which then seemed to give a kickstart to a number of discussions within the region at regional level and also at national level. So since then we've seen Pacific leaders and discourses that have appropriated this term and in ways that differ from the more universalist approaches that we might have seen at the global level. And part of that appropriation seems to be a linkage of the term with pre-existing alternative discourses of Pacific development. So prior to 2012, prior to the growth of green growth, if you like, we already had an established body of Pacific literature which was critiquing the standard models of sustainable development or neoliberal economics as it applies in the Pacific, written by people like Transform Angarao, Ralph Regan-Barnu, and the Pacific Council of Churches. And so that we're still working out, but there appears to be some convergence there between these newer discourses around green growth and those pre-existing discourses. So if we look at the broad contours of these two articulations and start with what the characteristics of the global discourse are, what we can see at that global level, or what we'd already seen, was a relative level of consensus around policy prescriptions, which, you know, at its extreme could be characterized as a one-size-fits-all, but is probably something less than that. Universal prescriptions that were largely technocratic in nature, with particular focus on renewable energy and other sorts of very technological interventions. A compatibility or a recognition and a promotion of the concept of compatibility of economic growth and environmental management. Emphasis on new technologies, as I've already said, definitely influenced by climate change, the challenge of climate change, and obviously increasingly those two conversations are seen in parallel or as linked with each other. And the green growth or blue economy concept linked with the goals of Big Green. So these are the big global NGOs, conservation NGOs, who have relatively recently moved to a more pro-business approach. Some people would, at the very critical end, would call that greenwashing. But what we've seen is alliances between NGOs and business operations to make business greener and smarter and more sustainable. We've seen it in relation to fisheries, and we've seen it in other areas as well. And there aren't very many pictures in this presentation, so thanks to Matt for this picture. This is a picture of the global literature, so it gives an example of where that global discourse has come from. And obviously it is continuing to evolve, just as the discourses in this part of the world. So moving on to what we've seen as the contours of the green growth discourse in the Pacific region. Here we see that green growth is often characterized, or can be characterized, much more as an act of self-determination, and is often linked with concepts of sovereignty, in particular resource sovereignty, so sovereignty of management of natural resources, whether that's fisheries, logging, or minerals and gas. It also ties in with the Pacific epistemologies, some of which we heard referenced by the Secretary General this morning, issues around stewardship, cultural obligations, preservation of resources and assets for future generations. The Pacific green growth discourse in some areas certainly seems to include an acknowledgement, a rhetorical acknowledgement of the trade-off between economic growth and social and environmental imperatives. And we've certainly spoken to people who are at the centre of these conversations who will say things like, we think it's okay to have less economic growth if it means that our social structure is preserved or our environmental structures are preserved. That's not a unanimous position, but there are certainly voices that are bringing those sorts of ideas to the fore. Green growth is often, can also be characterised as allowing for economic growth that is compatible with traditional economies, particularly the subsistence plus type economies that we see in the Melanesian countries, which is obviously where the bulk of the Pacific populations are. Just as with the global discourse, the Pacific discourse is also influenced by climate change and the global conversations about climate change. In particular, there is a very definite stream of this discourse which sees green growth and the blue-green economy as a conduit for climate finance, as those issues about how much, how, and who gets it are continued and developed. The green growth conversation is playing a very important part in that. It's also linked with conservation efforts as promoted by key individuals and civil society groups in the region. Some of those civil society groups are essentially the Pacific branches of these big global NGOs such as IUCN and WWF. Others are more homegrown, if you like, and are more locally grown groupings, whether it's the Green Growth Leaders Coalition that Aidan's going to talk about later, or other more local NGOs or civil society groupings. So our two case study countries are Fiji and Vanuatu, and what we've done here is look at the role of central planning documents, national planning documents, as vehicles for developing green growth as a policy driver. Now, the comparison is between the Green Growth Framework as it exists in Fiji and the National Sustainable Development Plan in Vanuatu. In Vanuatu, the National Sustainable Development Plan is much bigger than Green Growth. Green Growth is one aspect of a bigger plan. So these comparisons show that there are areas where there are some quite marked differences. There are also some areas where there are some similarities. One of the key similarities that we've noted is that neither of these documents makes an explicit acknowledgement of the potential for trade-offs between economic growth and environmental management. When we talk to the people that were involved in preparing these documents, they say that those trade-offs are acknowledged and were acknowledged as part of how these documents were developed, but it's not explicitly stated. An area of difference between Vanuatu and Fiji is that in Fiji, the Green Growth Framework was developed largely at an intragovernmental level, with some input from regional NGOs and also a small amount of representation of the wider community via the Aitauke board. In Vanuatu, the consultation was much more widespread. It involved staff from the Prime Minister's office that led this process, going out and holding community consultations in each of the 6 provinces. Here's another picture. As you can see, this is the Prime Minister's office team, and it was very much an exercise in planes, boats and automobiles to travel the length and breadth of the country to get this sense of community consultation and hopefully community ownership of what is going to be a key document going forward. We've seen various strands of external cooperation in the development of these documents, whether it's through the ADB by providing technical assistance. Triple GI are also involved in both Fiji and Vanuatu, again in slightly different ways. Triple GI seems to have, in Fiji, is working across quite a large, almost not necessarily whole of government, but is quite centrally, whereas in Vanuatu, Triple GI has its primary point of contact within the Department of Energy, which is a very small part of a ministry in Vanuatu. In Fiji, the Green Growth Framework is characterised as a mechanism for achieving the SDGs. And in Vanuatu, the NSDP has been written so that its goals and objectives are designed to align with the SDGs. And the Prime Minister's office, particularly their aid coordination team, is very keen to use the reporting that this document will create as a way of coordinating their reporting at national, regional and international level. And they're already having conversations with development partners and donors around that. So moving on to what we've seen in terms of regional policy approaches, we can certainly see that the promotion of green growth is linked with regional geopolitics, and we'll hear more from Jeremy about that in terms of Fiji's leadership in this. Looking at the PIDF, the Pacific Islands Development Forum, green growth is essentially its raison d'etre, and it's also its unique selling point. It's what it uses to set itself apart from other regional organisations. And as a point of contrast, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat uses a different term. It refers to low carbon development rather than green growth. We've certainly seen these concepts linked with Pacific Island collective diplomacy in global arenas, and conservation NGOs are using it as a framing concept. So these are our further questions, and these are the questions that are going to inform the work that we'll be doing subsequently, including writing up publications. So just to come back to the point I made about definition, lack of definition or varying definitions, it is more than semantics. We feel it's key to how these policies become robust in terms of implementation, and also how we'll be able to measure them is by coming together around what green growth means in a context, whether it's national or regional. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tess. I'm also very impressed by your time management, Tess. Tess assured me that she would finish in 14 minutes and 32 seconds, and I'm pretty sure that was very close, setting a very high bar for our next presenter, Jeremy. So Jeremy's bringing us a report on the UN Oceans Conference, the SDG 14 conference. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I was sort of tasked with reporting on the Oceans Conference. It's a bit of a large task to do, I think, in a little short slot. So what I'm trying to do is just to give an outline of the Oceans Conference, and then try and understand what that means for the Pacific, and then how that links into the blue economy or the blue-green economy as we're discussing here. So that's the focus of my talk. I should say I'm from the University of the South Pacific, but also I am seconded to the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner as well. So I come from those two different directions. Just to remind ourselves what we're talking about here. This picture taken from a satellite obviously shows the area we're talking about. There's quite a lot of ocean there and not so much land. And it's probably a good impression to take home that the ocean is very important, both for us in our present day lives, but also going back in time through history, ancestry and migration. So this is an image I think that is quite important to keep in mind when we talk about the economies of the region that we're talking about. So the UN Oceans Conference, I could say a lot about it. It was the first SDG conference to look at development and implementation of Agenda 2030. So this is the agenda that has been signed up by a majority of the governments around the world. It includes 17 SDGs, and one of those SDGs, SDG 14, is related to the oceans. And this was a conference focused on SDG 14. It was co-hosted by Fiji and Sweden. And I think that the Pacific, from what is said, has had quite a strong influence on the inclusion of certain targets within SDG 14, particularly the target related to the blue economy. So, in a way, the leadership shown by Fiji rather reflects some of the processes that went into the structuring of Agenda 2030. The conference was projected as a game changer in the text about it. It was trying to create a reboot or a reformulation, a new trajectory of the way that we deal with oceans, because the backdrop is that many aspects of the oceans are being degraded, various aspects are being lost, things are not getting better in the oceans. And that suggests that the way we're trying to manage and implement activities in the oceans is not sustainable. So it's trying to recapture a trajectory towards sustainability. There were about 6,000 delegates went to the UN Oceans Conference, so it was quite busy. There was more than 150 side events, plus various exhibitions going on, as you can see in the pictures. Also some music trying to give a taste of the Pacific to the rather concretized environment of the UN in New York. The three main outcomes that it came out with were a global call for action, which is somewhat a reiteration of SDG 14, but also there are certain nuances within that in the text. There was 7 partnership dialogues, which were more in-depth, focusing on particular SDGs, or groups of SDGs. And finally, there are voluntary commitments. So governments and other entities could put forward voluntary commitments about what they would do within Agenda 2030 related to SDG 14. All of those bits of information are on the website if you go to UN Oceans Conference. I'll just talk a little bit about the voluntary commitments. There were 1,372 voluntary commitments made across the world. 307 are from the South Pacific. Over 50% of them relate to pollution and ecosystems, which is SDG 14.1 and 14.2. Fiji is a beneficiary in 23 of these voluntary commitments. These commitments have a wide diversity, so a couple of examples relevant for Fiji. The FLAMA organisation looks towards scaling up LMMAs, locally managed marine areas, to 100%. I think at the moment in Fiji, it's about 79%. USP, it announced a Norway-Fiji professorial chair in oceans and climate change, trying to put more effort and resources into this nexus between oceans and climate change. And also then there was the government of Fiji put a number of voluntary commitments forward, including reduction in the use of plastic shopping bags. Again, this is all on the website. In a way, this sort of reflects the trajectory forward about what people are looking to implement under SDG 14. Just a few pictures. As you can see, it's quite far away from the people in the Pacific who make their livelihoods from the sea. There's lots of people in suits and ties, lots of large meetings, lots of discussions and interventions. Okay, so the question is how does what you see in front of you transpose itself into the Pacific area that we are in now? Well, a couple of things about SDG 14. Firstly, SDG 14 is nothing new. The Pacific has very strong regional ocean policy, which has been developed over a number of decades. There's a list of different ocean policy tools there. There's a whole load more of them. And a little review of them identified about 92 active and relevant targets for the oceans in the Pacific region. SDG 14 tracks onto all of those, so SDG 14 is nothing new. We already have all of SDG 14 targets and the indicators linked into existing regional policies. And probably the Pacific is one of the more advanced regions in the world in this respect. In SDG 14, we can also identify significant ocean investments that have gone on in the Pacific region. So this is for 16 Pacific countries. And work here on the Enhancing Pacific Ocean Governance Project, supported by the Australian Department of Environment and Energy, carried out with CSIRO, Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner and USP, we tried to collate together some of the development partner fundings that have gone in to the region over the last 10 years. This is not exhaustive, but I'd say it's probably indicative of what comes out. And you'll see a number of features of interest when we look at the amount of project finance that has been laid across the various SDGs. Firstly, most investment has been to manage and protect ecosystems. This is SDG 14.2. This is by far the most dominant part of where development finance has been targeted. Secondly, there is very limited investment on blue economy. Blue economy sits in 14.7. As you can see, the amount of finance going in there from development partners is really quite small. And thirdly, there's actually quite a lot of investment, development partner investment, that doesn't track on to the SDG 14. We can't classify it within that. So this is not a perfect graph, it's a very difficult area to pin down. But the suggestion is that the focus of efforts in the region on oceans through development partner finance has been targeted at managing and protecting, and certainly not focused on looking at investments in the blue economy. So, we've had the Oceans Conference. SDG 14 is a catalyst for change, and that is the way it was projected in the regional preparatory meeting for SDG 14 earlier in the year. And if we take a few sort of constructs forward, we see maybe a lack of consensus and useful articulation of the blue economy. It means different things to many different parties. So like Tess mentioned earlier on, actually coming to a useful definition is quite challenging. Secondly, we must recognise that SDG 14 is, as I put here, a pathway to global amorphism. SDG 14 is a global set of targets and indicators, and it, in a way, it belies some of the integrity, some of the past, some of the history, some of the identity of the Pacific. And as the Pacific Ocean Commissioner has said, there's a need to use SDG 14 targets for the region and not use the region for the targets. And the Pacific has various specificities as well, as I've mentioned before, related to its geography and ancestral past. And so there's a very strong move towards, and what has been announced at the Ocean Conference, the Blue Pacific. And I thank you, my friends in the audience from the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, for putting a lot of this together. And the Blue Pacific is trying to capture SDG 14, but in the Pacific context. It recognises large ocean stewardship states. It recognises a common sense of identity across the region. It appreciates integrated ocean governance. Rather than a fragmented project-based model, it tries to link different interventions together in a more cohesive and comprehensive approach. It tries to catalyse leverage of regionalism. So we've seen that Fiji was co-hosting the Oceans Conference. It's also Fiji is in the COP23. The Pacific, by working together, can have increased leverage in the various discussions that are going on around the world. It also helps to contextualise global commitments, not just SDG 14, but many of the SDGs that are relevant to the oceans. And there's a need for these global commitments to be linked in to what is important, what spiritual, cultural, geographical and identity assets that we have in this region. And finally, it's also there to promote and vector investments into the region. By standing up for what is needed for the Pacific, by the Pacific, then it can target those investments in an appropriate way. And this is the idea of the Blue Pacific, which is being announced by leaders in the incoming chair of the Pacific Islands Forum and will be taken forward in the leaders' meeting in due course this year. And this probably for the region is one of the biggest outcomes of the UN Oceans Conference, is the launching of the Blue Pacific. So finally, SDG 14 in the Oceans Conference, it's a game changer. That's how it's framed, and we framed it in the region as a catalyst for change. But what change is it going to create? What change are we trying to use it to lever and modify? How do we change SDG 14 to really capture the fundamental essence of the Pacific Oceanscape, which is well expounded in the policies that have been around in the region for a number of years and are gradually being implemented? How do we capture that essence within SDG 14? Are there gaps within SDG 14 that we need to include? And what is the desired investment portfolio across SDG 14 in the region? I've shown you that the focus has been management and protection. Do we need to move to a more blue economy? What is the ideal graph that I've shown you there at the bottom? What does that look like? Where do we want the investments to go into relation to SDGs, the SDG targets? That's a question and debate that has not been had. What I've picked up is the fragments of activity that have been going over the last 10 years, rather than thinking about a cohesive, well-evidenced way forward to meeting Agenda 2030 over the next decade and a bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Emeline Siale Ilolohia, who is the Executive Director of the Civil Society Forum of Tonga, to give her presentation on the building local ownership and action on green growth and lessons from the Hapai development model and green growth dialogue in Tonga. Thank you, Emeline.
Thank you. Maloelele, greetings from Tonga. It's always good to run away from Tonga only for a day, but I'm speaking on behalf of a group of people, Tonga National Leadership Development Forum, so I just want to start by acknowledging that I'm just a tiny bit of that puzzle, but I'm speaking on behalf of that group, sharing our stories on the blue-green economy and the green growth in Tonga. This is just a bit of background information on the Tonga National Leadership Development Forum. This coalition work was started, introduced by the Pacific Leadership Program, which is an Australian government funded project. The idea of coalition work was being part of the PLP work in terms of thinking developmental leadership. One of the key areas that has been supported by the Pacific Leadership Program is looking at how we can look into collective actions, bringing different people who may have a common purpose to work together on a particular issue. So the coalition work started with that thinking in mind. When it started this work in Tonga, we have been humbly asked PLP to allow Tongans to see how we can shape our own coalition work on this particular issue of leadership. And so we have this group representations from the royal family, nobility, parliament, cabinet, public sector, private sector, civil society, women, youth, academia, and the communities. So we have representatives of people from these different sectors. And these sectors are kind of represent the different levels of our Tongan society. It was identified that leadership is what we wanted to work on, but we had no idea how to go about in this journey. PLP has supported the research done to look into what kind of leadership that we want. At this particular time, this was in 2009, Tonga has its first democratic elections in 2010. So this is during that particular environment where people were talking democracy. We're talking about this huge change in how people will be more engaged, how we get people to participate from a very hierarchy system where a lot of time is just the royalty and the nobility and key people in our society deciding for a lot of things in terms of how our development has been progressing. So this has led the work of DNLDF to the National Leadership Code that we there's a national-wide consultation, and now we have a leadership code that consists of 14 principles. We had gone into recognizing that this code would not be a kind of a legal thing where you could be like trying to police everybody, and with understanding that we have an already existing legal framework that if someone breaks the rule or be corrupted, the law will take care of that. But this is more into values. How do we recognize that this value is something that is your personal commitment? So we kind of work with a more of a signatory process. So we had about 200 plus signatories to the code, and that was presented in 2015 to the coronations of our current king, as kind of recognition that this is what people expectations of leaders, and it should be kind of a people's presence to the king, to recognize that in this environment, in this time of change in Tonga, people wanted to be part of that. Okay, then where does the green growth came into being? Well, PLP with the conversation with the DNLDF was saying a lot of times, so what? You have a code, what is it now that you wanted to do next? So there was a number of national consultations identifying issues that some of our community had identified from the leadership code consultation. And so Hapai identified the marine depleting resources as one of the key areas that there has been a lot of discussions when we were out doing the consultation on the code. Again, PLP had supported us to do our research on that, and it was done by the now the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. At the time, he was doing this consultancy work for us in doing in getting the research, and it was just confirming the things that people were talking about from their traditional understanding of their communities. They were sharing that they're now going deeper into the sea to get just fish and all of that. And so the research was just confirming all of that. What we find interesting here is that there were other challenging things that we as development actors recognize as climate change, sea level rising, erosion, waste. All of that were very little discussions from the community when you are really out there. And what we find interesting is that for the community, this is life for them. You don't separate everyday living, your livelihood around any of these issues, because they're just like they're coping. They are very distant from the developmental thinking that there is something out there that's called climate change. For them, the reality is that there are certain months of the day or the year that they would have to really struggle to get a bit of rainwater, because that's the only source of water that they have in their small communities. So really the process is very much part of the success of this work as well, where we also recognize that there are programs already in place There were the small, the special marine protected areas, for example, which supported by the small grant of CHEF, a project that is currently working with Civil Society Forum of Tonga. There was also this organic virgin coconut oil partnership by Oxfam through the New Zealand government and the Tonga National Youth Congress. So we were kind of looking around at the communities. What are the things that is already happening that can kind of support developmental leadership in terms of identifying where are the people that we need to work with to translate the information that we know about development into community development work. So I'm just giving you a few photos. But what's important here is that we started to take the communities along in a tour, so that we try to get them to think this is not just a reality, this is not just a fact, that they would have to, that they're so normal for them. You know, there's something out there that is being talked about that need to recognize that these are challenges that are facing. Sometimes it's caused by things outside of their community. This is just a map of, the challenges that has been coming out from these pictures are the sea level rising, erosions, waste, and kind of impact of climate change. The picture kind of gives you an idea of how Hapai is also a challenging geographically in terms of how it's being laid out. So the cost of getting from one small community to another on itself is being a barrier to some of the people in this community in terms of being access to certain social services, let alone the support being provided by developmental partners. I'm just showing this because this is the kind of thing that has been important for the Pacific Leadership Program in support of the Tonga National Leadership Development Framework Forum, because it's allowed those conversations to happen. And most of the time, you don't have these spaces in the community to talk about this, talking about conservation, talking about sustainable management and sustainable use of their resources, talking about the governance, how much they need to be engaged, how much they need to be part of this whole process. So with the Hapai Development Forum, we work with Hapai setting up their so I'm just putting this is how the process of engaging with our community in terms of making sure that along the way that we give them some kind of a purpose, the state of vulnerability that they are, how we support them in terms of moving to the state of progress. And that is where Green Growth comes into the focus of this work, because we felt that it's just providing the kind of a tool to support this community in making sure that when we talk development, it's the people in the community that we consider first before we even look into the leadership, the structure, the policy, the resources. And in terms of all of that, it's supposed to move them from their state of vulnerability to the state of progress. And it's not people from outside to come and do that, but how we mobilize people so they are part of that process in progressing in whatever form that they want to be part of that process. With the leadership code, we bring that into being in part of putting values into this health green growth work. The 14 principles that I have explained become the guiding principle of our green growth work in Hapai. It's it's a whole lot of putting the structures in place as well, because we recognize that this is a leadership approach. If we are to make sure that these green growth initiative that we work requires very tough decision making for some of our local key leaders. And they have to have a structure in place that can support the work that they're doing and making sure that the voices that are raised from the community in this process are being heard all the way up to the national level. This is just an example of how our Green Growth Plan was being put together. And in a way, this helps for this community of Hapai to make sure that they are aligning some of the issues that they have raised from their community all the way to the national level. This is just an example of how we have developed our leadership code to become like the guiding principles of some of our community plans and of course our green growth strategy. So we have certain guiding principles that let the community plans, let the community constitution when they formulate their councils and all of that is actually built from our leadership code. This is just examples and photos of this work program setting up village council as part of our governance green growth structures for the Hapai community. We also recognize that we need to have a green growth strategy to make sure that our livelihood actions are being connected. This is an example of how the youth work in Hapai are being working in Hapai is an example of this. Has been bit from the agriculture show. This is also from the SMA. SMA is like the marine protected areas. And the interesting thing on the SMA that we are working quite closely with women in terms of their alternative livelihood. So the idea is that if you conserve your marine resources, you have to have some kind of alternative to keep community with their livelihood so that they don't go back to their protected areas. Again, a few photos. This is from the Hapai Agriculture Show. And you see that they have translated the green growth into Hapai Mauiui and Uilele, which is their own definitions of green growth. For Hapai, the definitions of green growth, I know the first speaker had asked, had kind of share from their study. They wanted to define clear definitions in the Pacific context. For Hapai, the way that they look into green growth is only in two areas. One is conservation of their marine resources. The other one is sustainable use of their agriculture in terms of their organic work. That's very simple for the Hapai community. Green growth for them are just those two. Now lately is the work on blue economy. And I will just finish off with the bit about the policy level. With the policy level, we had worked with the Hapai and we have set up all the foundations, the groundwork. What the Hapai, the Tonga National Development Forum had done is they take all the issues, all the learning that has been done on green growth in Hapai to the national level. And there was a green growth dialogue in November last year. A lot of conversation has happened, and the state of where it is now is that there was a Nukalova declarations on green growth submitted to Cabinet. Cabinet had noted the report. Cabinet has also recognized that this is a work in progress towards green growth and resilience Tonga to the impact of climate change. And they set up a task force, consists of 11 different organizations, 9 of it are CEO from government ministry, 1 from civil society, and 1 from private sector. So basically, that reflects that Tonga has not been I don't see that there is any commitment at all from government as yet, but this is the first move that they had recognized that green growth needs to go into development agenda of Tonga. So with the building up to the ocean conference that my colleagues have just shared, we had held another Blue Economy Dialogue in May of this year. And so the idea is that to revisit the declarations on green growth. The only additional thing that has come out from our ocean and our blue economy that has not been in our declarations for the green growth was to look into the issue of seabed mining. So that's going to be really tough. But I think green growth is a political green growth work is a political space, and I think we really need to consider that the community needs to be part of that process as well. It's not something that is just happening at the national level. My apology for the bit of addition. I may not have this opportunity again, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmeline. Now, because of our early start, we're actually looking very good to have quite a bit of time available for questions. So please put your thinking caps on. And I might ask our coordinator, do we have some mechanism for our online audience to ask questions as well? Okay, we do. So to our online audience as well, please put your thinking caps on for questions. And I will invite our last speaker, Aidan Craney, who is the research coordinator at the Pacific Leadership Program, to give his presentation. Thank you, Aidan.
Nisambula Vinaka and warm Pacific greetings. Before I begin, as is customary in Australia, I would like to thank the people of Rewa, the traditional custodians of this land that we meet on. I'd also like to thank ANU, USP and the ADB for the opportunity today, and all of you for attending. I was pretty happy when I saw in the conference program that I'd be attending in the main lecture theatre, because immediately after the opening remarks, a lot of the time if there's a bit of inertia about which session you're going to go to, people just return to the previous place they sat. So hopefully for those of you who that applies to, you've learned something here. Also, as Siale said, she's happy to be out of Tonga. I'm happy to be out of bitterly cold Melbourne at the moment. It's always a pleasure to be able to come somewhere, kick your shoes off and wear something a bit more floral. So today I'll be talking about some work on the project, on the process and logic of the Green Growth Leaders Coalition. This is based on an action research project that I'm involved in with David Hudson at the University of Birmingham Developmental Leadership Program, Dawn Gibson at the IUCN office up the road, and me representing Pacific Leadership Program and La Trobe University. So some background for Green Growth Leaders Coalition. The idea for GGLC was conceived through ongoing conversations between multiple people who were involved in governments and the development industry for a number of years. These people were concerned that the approaches to development that were being undertaken by Pacific governments and also donors and multilaterals in the region weren't actually entirely engaging with Pacific ideals and values. So, based at IUCN and with the support of the Pacific Leadership Program, in 2012 a coalition was formed that involved a number of leaders from governments, regional organisations, civil society and the private sector. And they were coalesced to discuss sustainable development challenges that they faced. Despite being based in institutions having the title, the Green Growth Leaders Coalition is actually this assemblage that operates between the formal and the informal. The membership of the coalition is fluid, so different people come in and they don't really leave the coalition as such, but it's a constantly expanding network. To becoming involved in the coalition, it actually requires being invited by the Secretary of IUCN in consultation with the core members of the coalition. There are two criteria that are used to attract recruit to GGLC. The first is that people have to have a developmental mindset. So they have to have the values and goals of achieving sustainable change that is in the interests of the benefit. Secondary to this is that they're supposed to be able to influence developmental leadership and change in the next 3 to 5 years. The first meeting took place in 2012, as I mentioned before, and they used the Talanoa format for discussion. The Talanoa wasn't just as a different way to approach meetings of these sorts. It was to actually truly embody being a Pacific-based organisation. And what has happened since then has been that the multi-day Talanoa has been in place on an annual basis. What is green growth? Well, thankfully I don't need to tell you because Tess already did. But just to kind of reiterate, the understandings of green growth are that it is complex and adaptive in terms of its definitions and practice. Green growth is terminology that's kind of been imported, so things like blue-green economy are just as applicable and are largely practical for green growth. It is important to understand, though, that the technical terminology and references to green growth that were common in the development of green growth framework in East Asia are not as applicable to how the Green Growth Leaders Coalition works, which is more focused on utilising the Nur and the Moana in ways that promote economic growth without risking the natural environment. So in recent, probably in the last 10 or so years, we've seen a significant shift in the approaches to development in the Pacific region. The success of the parties to the Nauru Agreement, the creation of the Pacific Islands Development Forum, the role that Pacific Islanders played in the High Ambition Coalition, COP21, and indeed the Blue Pacific and the New Pacific region, mentioned earlier by Jeremy and by Damien Taylor in the opening remarks. All testify to the changes that are happening within the region. GGLC members embody what Sandra, Tart and Greg Fry also capture in the book The New Pacific Diplomacy. GGLC's manner of operating also reminiscent of decades-old ideas in the region, reflected in Ratamara's concept of the Pacific Way, for collective action, for embracing change and leadership that thinks about the Pacific region collectively and interconnected, rather than just in the interests of one's own self or their state or institution. The multi-day Talanoa format employs the Chatham House rule, so all discussions behind closed doors are held in confidence unless an agreement is made that those discussions will reach beyond the four walls. The confidential nature of the format serves a couple of purposes. One is that it helps to build trust in the room. People can feel like they can safely challenge others. They can also challenge their own thinking, and quite often people will express things that might actually go against what their institutional hat would suggest. Even if they're not tying themselves to those comments, they might be asking questions of themselves. And it also allows people to remove those institutional hats, as it were. It also shows the willingness of the GGLC to not throw the baby out with the bathwater and start again. There's no need to reinvent the wheel on development. It uses some embedded development practices and orthodoxy and builds on them in a Pacific manner. A further aspect of promoting regional identity occurs through formal and informal support mechanisms of GGLC. So the more established members of the coalition are encouraged to provide mentoring support to younger and newer members, and with the evolving membership and the focus on being able to influence change in the next 3 to 5 years, this is really useful. For some of the younger members, they've actually reported back to us that they see it as a way of fast-tracking their skill set and their network. This also capitalises on the knowledge that exists within the network, but also seeks to expand on the influence and leadership capacities of its members, and also uses the drive and momentum that actually comes from having fresh blood in any organisation. Further support is offered through the Secretariat based out of the Centre for Environmental Governance at IUCN, and IUCN seeks to maintain contact with members throughout the year between the meetings to see what challenges they're facing and what support they can offer. So today's title was the development of diplomacy next steps. And the reason that we're approaching our understanding of the growth leadership coalition through the Action Research Project as representing a nexus of development diplomacy is that typically development diplomacy has been seen as working together, but more so that in a way that understands development work forward. GGLC doesn't lift this on its head, but it does seek to utilise diplomatic tools for development rather than development just for diplomacy purposes. So it uses tools like relationship building and meetings with high-level individuals to push for development reform that limits issues of self-interest and instead advocates for awareness of the interconnectivity and reliance on specific states and natural environments. The Talanoa also offers a specific alternative to agenda-based meetings, providing space to listen, reflect, and challenge. And this is really key to how the format works. Instead of going in with a fixed agenda and fixed ideas, what happens is there's a very loose agenda. There is a facilitator who makes sure that people kind of stay within the realm of what we should be talking about at any one time. But people aren't wedded to ideas. They don't come in with a fixed idea that they will then push an agenda on afterwards when it comes to the discussion time. It's also a meeting space where the amount of silence is really incredible. People take the opportunity to not have to speak, which is a really wonderful thing I find, as opposed to most agenda-based meetings where people are all trying to make sure that they represent what the talking points that they walk in. By engaging leaders from multiple sectors in these discussions, networks of influence can be expanded as well as stories and values shared by the coalition can inform policy and practice decisions individuals and institutions make going forward. And this is represented as well in the diversity of the membership. So the fact that people are drawn from government, regional organisations, civil society and the private sector means there's a diverse array of talent and ideas in the room. It also kind of speaks to Coldwell's remarks as well of the value of the Pacific Update itself. There are so many different people in the room. Academia is not going to solve the world's problems. Government isn't going to solve the world's problems. The development industry won't solve the world's problems. We need to be working collaboratively. Doing this also further through knowledge that achieving development reforms doesn't just require the support of leaders, it actually sees the potential of leaders to drive the change themselves, willing to promote developmental reform in the knowledge that they have support and shared values with others. So very briefly, I'm going to speak about some of the achievements of the Green Growth Leaders Coalition. And these are actually really difficult to measure because the membership of the coalition is fluid and the members all have other institutional hats that they wear. But the way that I'm reflecting these to you are the way that they've been reported to me and to Dawn Gibson. So GGLC has been influential in reference to National Sustainable Development Plan. Most recently, the Vanuatu 2030 People's Plan. Part of the motivation for that came through conversations that happened at the beginning of the 2012 Leaders Retreat. The Fiji National Development Plan was also influenced by members. Very specifically, GGLC promotes specific approaches to decision making. So this is seen in the Talanoa format. GDSC itself operates again. And this was then extended last year to the Melanesian Spearhead Group Leaders Summit, where there was a Talanoa session held. And this directly came out of last year's annual meeting. Green growth talks were also included in the PIF Leads meeting in 2012, and coastal fisheries was put on the agenda in 2016. Again, largely coming out of the meeting that happened that year. And on a more grassroots level, or how it affects the grassroots, after Cyclone Winston last year, we had it reported by members from Tonga and Fiji, the relationships they built up through the Green Growth Leaders Coalition. It actually led to an expedited response to the Tongan support to Fiji, where instead of going through official channels and red tape that may not delay decisions all that much, where every member counts is really important, members could get on the phone to one another and direct support where it was needed really, really quickly. So my timing's pretty good because I'm just getting to 1 minute wrap up. So I'll just put a quick plug in for a briefing note that PVP has recently put out on the Green Growth Leaders Coalition. And there are a number of briefing notes at the back. So as you walk out, as you come back in the next session, feel free to grab some of those. But I will finish up on that point and leave it to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aidan. And thank you to all our speakers. Thank you. You've done a wonderful job keeping to time and also to present a range of very stimulating ideas. There are a whole lot of questions that have been asked as well as ideas put forward, so it's now my pleasure to open the floor to questions and also to online questions. So please fire away. We have one here. Thank you. So the question is the panel's perspective on opportunities for gender participation in this discussion. Aidan.
This is an issue that the GGLC has been approaching because when you set up a coalition and say the members need to be influential in the next 3 to 5 years, that risks kind of just cementing who's already in a leadership position and giving them absolute power. So a new focus has been put in with the emphasis more on the 5 years than the 3, to bring in more young people and more women. And it's interesting, so doing the research for the Pacific Leadership Program, reporting back then to the Australian government, I know that, and coming from a development research background, I know that the question of gender will be raised in a coalition where I still think about 2/3, maybe even 3/4 of membership is male. The leaders themselves are actually really keen to get new blood in to mentor them. But also the women who are involved have mentioned that they have seen a huge change in the last 5 or so years where established leaders are reaching out to them, which I found really interesting. It wasn't something that I was aware of previously.
Thank you, Aidan. Other responses from the panel?
Just a response on the participations of women. The good thing about the Green Growth work in Hapai that's been facilitated by the Tonga National Leadership Forum, the funding for PLP, because it's very much driven from the ground, and we have that influence in terms of facilitating the process. all the governance structure of the Hapai plan in the Hapai green growth. We have introduced the temporary special measures that some of our islands community are struggle with at the national level into this platform. So there's a compulsory membership of women and youth and disability, if that is part of the questions that you asked. So it's interesting because when you have that space, you can really influence what's going on there from the community, and it's coming from them. So it's very much easier than when we try to get us women into politics and into parliament, which I think that we need to make sure that if we are having some of that at the national level, it can be mirrored at the community level. And green growth is just a new thing. It's totally new in terms of engaging people. So it's a great platform to introduce what we can do at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any other comments?
Uh, 14.7, and that was only one side of the story, given that it reflects the donors. What about the countries where they are investing in terms of the spectrum of SDG 14? On the green growth framework and the research, I understand that this is more like an ex-post analysis of the green growth framework that have been developed in the region. But first of all, going back a step and looking at, do we really need green growth frameworks, or it can be better integrated into the national development plans? Given that my experience in the region is that you keep on creating new frameworks, you need new resources, new policy metrics, new human resources, as well as the political capital that is required behind it, and it creates multiple targets, multiple frameworks for small administrations to manage with economic over time. One good example would be to look at, for example, the public expenditure